"Look, Mama, there she is." We had boarded the last ferry from Lower Manhattan to Governor's Island. And when I say the last ferry, it was the last ferry, and we ran to catch it. The sun was just beginning to set behind the majestic woman standing in the harbor with her torch held high. And as I held my child close and looked out over the water, I was surprised by the tears that filled my eyes and the lump that rose in my throat. The boat shifted, and soon the sun was so bright behind her we could barely see the statue. "Don't look into the sun," I told my daughter. "It could hurt your eyes." And there was something poetic about the fact that we could no longer look at liberty without being blinded. The truth is, I could barely look at her at all. Not because of the sun, but because of a feeling that arose the moment she came into view. It wasn't sadness, it wasn't regret, it wasn't longing, it wasn't shame. I felt the way a child does when they know they have done something wrong. You know that look where they try to meet their parents' eyes, but they simply can't, and they look down and around and anywhere but in your face. I couldn't meet her eyes. And the shame I felt that afternoon on the ferry was not mine alone. It was shame felt on behalf of our nation, on behalf of America, the land that never has been yet, and yet must be. I could barely look at Lady Liberty because I could not bear what we have become. As I gazed upon her, I could hear the cries of children at the border and see the photos of asylum seekers languishing in refugee camps around the world, banned from entering this land of the free. From Staten Island, I heard echoing across the water the death cries of Eric Garner, "I can't breathe." And still there she stood, the statue, her beak in hand, holding out the promise of worldwide welcome, despite it all, reminding us of what? Of who we once were? Of who we could be? The Statue of Liberty was dedicated in 1886. She was conceived of, however, in 1865, just after the end of the Civil War. She was born in a conversation between philosopher and abolitionist Edouard de la Boulaye and the artist Frédéric Auguste Bartholdi. For La Boulaye, a member of the French Anti-Slavery Society, the idea was to create a monument to abolition, to freedom, to symbolize American independence, yes, but also to symbolize the end of slavery. The original conception of the statue was to have her holding broken chains and shackles in her left hand and to have them also scattered at her feet. But in the final version, a tablet took the place in her hand, and slavery's horror was hidden from view. The chains are still there, though. She strides barefoot over a broken shackle and scattered links of chain. Sometime, I must have told my daughter this story, because as we rode by Lady Liberty on our way to Governor's Island, as we went to sleep on the island in a canvas tent, yes, you can camp on Governor's Island, right in the New York City harbor. And when we woke in the morning to the statue's solemn and steadfast presence, my little one, who was only 4 years old at the time, asked me again and again, "Mama, where are the chains at her feet?" Well, you can't see them unless you're in a helicopter far above the island. Psychologist Joy DeGruy is the author of the book Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome, and she spoke about the Statue of Liberty in an interview a number of years ago after she visited there. And once she learned that the chains were still there, but for all intents and purposes invisible, the African-American scholar said, "I thought to myself, they are invisible like us." Until about 2014, the chains at the feet of Lady Liberty were not only invisible to the eye, they had been lost to history as well. The National Park Service, which maintains the statue, had no mention of the chains or abolition anywhere in their literature or on their website or on their tours. Joy DeGruy and others pressured the Park Service to tell the true story, and today you can read about the chains and the abolitionist message they represent on the Park Service website and in their brochures, and you can see a picture there of them. Now, despite Acting Citizenship and Immigration Services Director Ken Cusinelli's proposed edit a couple of weeks ago, the statue's tablet still bears Emma Lazarus's words, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free." We must remember, though, that the Statue of Liberty was not only intended to welcome European immigrants, it was also to symbolize the struggle for freedom of African peoples unjustly enslaved in this land for hundreds of years. White America erased that meaning by hiding liberty's chains from view and from history. Why does this matter now? Well, having recently left my post as a congregational minister to come to Emory and take a position here in Atlanta, I am now an itinerant preacher of sorts. And as I thought about what I want to preach in this new role, this new freeing role, I thought there's nothing more important today than talking about American values and ideals, and for us, about how they dovetail with Unitarian Universalist ideals and values. So here was my plan. In the run-up to 2020, I would preach, and I would, of course, not tell anyone how to vote, but I would implore everyone to vote when the time comes, imagining that by now, some of those I'd meet along the way might be feeling so weary that even the act of voting might seem worthless. Perhaps some of you have felt that way. At the first service, they said no one had felt that way. But if you had felt that way, I would be the one to fill you with hope. I would preach around the American South, and I would remind us that America is more than sound bites and toxic rhetoric. I would fire people up to register and canvass and then head to the polls with the faith that we as Americans are a people fundamentally dedicated to freedom and equality, that this is who we truly are, that this is who we have always truly been. I would quote Langston Hughes, "Equality is in the air we breathe." Yes, that is what I would say. I would say equality is in the air we breathe. But that would be a lie, wouldn't it? Because the next line of the poem says it plain. There's never been equality for me, nor freedom in this homeland of the free. And who is speaking? Hughes answers, "The poor white person, fooled and pushed apart," he says. "The black person, bearing slavery's scars, the Native American, driven from the land, the immigrant, clutching the hope I seek and finding only the same old stupid plan of dog eat dog, of mighty crush the weak." Hughes wrote that poem in 1938. He could have written it yesterday. It tells the story of America past and present, a story of oppression and power run amok, a story of slavery and genocide, a story of exclusion and persecution, a story of racism and white supremacy. These are ugly things to say and ugly things to reckon with. And they are true. Just last month, Nicole Hannah Jones wrote in the introductory essay to the 1619 Project in the New York Times Magazine that the United States is a nation founded on both an ideal and a lie. Our Declaration of Independence, signed on July 4th, 1776, proclaims that all men are created equal. But the white men who drafted these words, she said, did not believe them to be true for thousands, the hundreds of thousands of black people in their midst. The goal of the 1619 Project is to reframe American history by considering what it would mean to regard 1619, the year the first ship bearing enslaved people arrived on the shores of the Virginia colonies, as our nation's birth year. Doing so, the editors write, requires us to place the consequences of slavery and the contributions of Black Americans at the very center of the story we tell ourselves about who we are as a country. Contributors to the 1619 Project, in no uncertain terms, expose the prevalence of bigotry and white supremacy and hate at the very bedrock of our nation. 400 years later, the hate-filled anti-Black and anti-brown racism that we hear spewing from the top levels of government is not causing people to hate. That hate was always there, under the surface. It begs the question, which is worse, to have it be hidden or out in the open? Now, I'm all for transparency, but I think that emboldening people's hatred of others, of the other, is a dangerous precedent, and it is one that history has seen before. And still we watch as immigration raids are carried out around the country, as a shooter in El Paso targets those of Latino descent, as the Trump administration attempts to change laws so that children can be held in detention indefinitely. We are haunted by images of children and families caged behind fences and barbed wire without adequate food or medical care, held for weeks and months on end. People are literally dying in U.S. custody. Now, I know that UUCA is beginning a letter-writing initiative, writing both to lawmakers and to those in detention at the Stewart Detention Center here in Georgia. I commend you for this work. And I also understand that this project is in need of leadership. So if you are inspired to be a part of this important effort and help it make it happen here at UUCA, you are invited to reach out to Reverend Taryn and let her know that. We need your voices, because they will join those of millions of Americans who are calling for an end to inhumane conditions at detention centers. One group, a Jewish group, Never Again Action, has led protests and civil disobedience at detention centers and in Washington, D.C. These are American Jews recognizing the connections between their own history and what is happening today. Many Japanese Americans, too, have spoken out against these centers, some of which are in the same facilities where their families were held during World War II. They see not only their own internment, but the blame and the scapegoating, the hatred and hysteria that accompanied it, mirrored in the treatment of migrants at the border. We forget history at our peril. But we must also remember that there is another side to our story. Ibram X. Kendi writes in his book, Stamped from the Beginning, that in his careful study of America's past, he saw the anti-racist force of equality moving against the racist force of inequality as they both marched forward, progressing in rhetoric, in tactics, in policies. And in her book, White Rage, Carol Anderson also chronicles what Kendi calls the dual and dueling history of America. She writes, the trigger for white rage inevitably is Black advancement. It is not the mere presence of Black people that is a problem, she says. Rather, it is Blackness with ambition, with drive, with purpose, with aspirations, and with demands for full and equal citizenship. A formidable array of policy assaults and legal contortions has consistently punished Black resilience, she says, Black resolve. As a nation, we, and especially white Americans, are called in this moment to witness the experience of the Black community in this country and to understand the connections with other communities who have faced and continue to face oppression in America, especially as they advance socially and economically. The hatred that inspired a man to kill dozens at a Walmart in El Paso this summer is the same hatred that inspired the massacre of Jews in their Pittsburgh synagogue in 2018. It is the same hatred that killed Heather Heyer in Charlottesville in 2017. It is the same hatred that murdered Black worshipers in Charleston in 2015. And it is the same hatred that has babies dying in the desert and in detention right now, right here on American soil. It is hatred that vilifies and demonizes the other that blames the other for a nation's ills, for one's own misfortune, for injustices perpetrated by those in power. It is hatred that seeks to control and humiliate, to punish and destroy. And so as Unitarian Universalists, as a people of faith who approach this world with eyes wide open, we are called to be honest and unflinching about the past and the present of our nation, and about the places where our own spiritual ancestors were complicit with and motivated by racism. And as Unitarian Universalists, as a people who believe in the power of love, we also remember that hate is not the whole story of our nation. The other side of the story of America is the one written by the people who demand full and equal citizenship, even when it means violence and humiliation and death. It is also the story of the people who stand and fight and die beside them. We are called today to join in the ongoing struggles for human rights and human dignity, those of people of color, of immigrants, of women, of the LGBTQ community, the disabled community. And some of us will lead on the front lines. Some of us are leading on the front lines. Some of us follow behind in solidarity. But these struggles are connected, and so are we. We, the people, one strong body. Remember who we are. We are a nation where hate simmers right under the surface. And we are a nation whose story is one of a determined march towards equality in the face of that hate, in spite of that hate, and in direct opposition to it. So how will you shimmer? How will you let your light shine in the struggle? How will we challenge ourselves to stand tall like that mighty woman in the New York harbor and lift our lamp beside the golden door? All through the night on Governor's Island, I didn't sleep. I listened to the wind as it whipped around that canvas tent, and I thought of the statue on her pedestal. I thought of the hypocrisy her presence held for African Americans during Reconstruction and the brutal years that followed. For Native Americans abused and murdered and then relegated to reservations. Even for the European immigrants who sailed past her and had their names changed, Americanized at Ellis Island. And I thought of her imprisoned lightning, her silent cry commanding us as a nation to meet her mild eyes and live into our promise to be that land that never has been yet, and yet must be. When I emerged from the tent the next morning, her torchlight beamed in the dawn. The rising sun illuminated her cloaked form. The feeling of shame I'd felt on the ferry was replaced that morning with a firm resolve and a deep understanding and acceptance of who we are. We are the nation that hid the chains and tried to erase both slavery and abolition from the history of the Statue of Liberty. And we are the nation represented in that statue as she marches resolute over those broken chains. May it be so.